sex is a big part of who we are. In one way or another, we're all sexual creatures. That goes for crime, too. Sometimes it goes for crime, especially. And today on Deviant Off Script, we're talking to Doug Fifer. For a long time, he was with the Anchorage Police Department in Alaska, where he specialized in hostage negotiation and sex crimes. He's out with a new book called 50 Shades of True Crime that talks about sex and the criminal mind, and sex and our minds. It's a fascinating book. It's a fascinating discussion. So let's get into it. Doug Fifer, welcome to Deviant. Thanks so much for being with us here today.
Dan, thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Yep. Doug is the author of the new book, 50 Shades of True Crime. And it's spicy. It's a spicy meatball. And there's a lot that there's a lot wrapped up into it. And for those of you who have watched and listened to this show, you've heard a little bit about Alaska. You've heard a little bit about sexual deviancy and serial sexual crimes. And this was Doug's job for a very long time. But instead of me introducing you, how about you introduce you? Tell us a little bit about your career in Alaskan law enforcement.
Yeah, I was born in a small town called Homer, Alaska. It's about 5,000 people. They do have a police department, but it's very small. I moved to Anchorage later on in life. And then, as all young professionals do, I needed a job. I wanted something that was exciting, had some adrenaline. Alaskans love to be outdoors and do different type of things. So I thought law enforcement might be a good route for me. So I applied with the Anchorage Police Department and the Alaska State Troopers in 1996. Those are our large police departments. I was hired by APD, Anchorage, and then Troopers a week later, but I'd already accepted the job. So I spent my 25-year career in Anchorage and the surrounding area serving my community.
And within a police career, you move through various things. What was your career trajectory? Obviously, I guess you started in patrol and you blossomed from there.
Yeah, everybody starts in patrol. You know, when you're a rookie, you got to go out on the streets, kind of learn your way, get your experience. I served on patrol a long time. The reason being is because I absolutely loved it. Every second changes. It's adrenaline rush. No shift is the same. You're working 10, 12, 14 hours, but it's a lot of excitement. But I also wanted to be in special units as well. And Anchorage is really good at that. You can serve patrol, detective, and still serve on these specialty teams. So I worked on the crime scene response team. That's almost like a homicide response team that goes out, forensically maps the crime scenes. These are sworn officers that do it. Kind of like CSI, but a little more intense. Instead of 5 minutes, you find the hair. It's about 24 hours straight of working. You collect all the evidence. So not as glamorous as TV, but pretty cool. Really, my sweet spot was about 10 years into my career where I wanted to be a hostage negotiator. Just fascinated me talking to individuals, resolving crisis without using force. So I put in for that. I was selected, and then I was off and running as a hostage negotiator. Eventually, I was a team leader where I had a team of 5 members. We'd respond out to various types of crimes, hostage situations, things like that to resolve them. Really professional team. And sometimes that brought us out of Anchorage. Since we were the largest, most professionally trained team, we might respond to anywhere in Alaska, help out the FBI, help out the troopers, things like that. That's really what I loved. And I had a lot of experience doing that for about 15 years as a negotiator.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you watch TV, you talk about preconceived notions. Same deal with hostage negotiation. It seems like there's going to be a hostage negotiation every week. How often do those things actually happen?
More often than you think. You have a call-out team for a reason. So you might have a suicidal subject with family members inside. So it's not quite a hostage scenario, but still one that we need to resolve without violence.
Yeah.
You might have a bank robbery where they get caught up in the bank and they're making all these type of demands. It just takes time and effort to kind of walk them out, make them realize the situation they're in. It's kind of like a chess match back and forth between the cop, who's the negotiator, and the suspect, whatever crime they did. So you want to build that rapport. It takes a little while. You want them to come out with any type of violence. It's actually better for the cops, better for the community, and also better for the suspect.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. When people think about hostage negotiation, they usually think about bank robbers and such, but hostage negotiation doesn't always involve what you would think of as a hostage situation, right? Like, let's say there's a pursuit and the person that's being chased runs home, right? And he knows he's there. So you go to scoop him up, but there are a family at home. That's a scenario that you would be called upon to handle, but it's not a hostage situation. Is that like the kind of scenario that we're talking about?
Yeah, you're spot on. Even that subject may not even get into his house, but he could have a firearm in his car and refusing to come out of the car. So he's surrounded by, our SWAT team or cops, and then they bring in negotiators to actively negotiate him out of that vehicle. If he doesn't have a phone, we'll deliver a phone via robot. We might use a bullhorn. We're going to communicate somehow with them because we don't want to get involved in violence or a shootout or something like that. And I'll tell you, 9 times out of 10, it works. Every once in a while, there's not much that police can do when a suspect or perpetrator's made up their mind. But most of the time, it works very effective. And out of all the things I did in law enforcement, that's probably the most enjoyable.
There's got to be a lot of improvisation involved in that, right?
There is. On a negotiator team, you have a primary negotiator that talks to the suspect. You have a secondary negotiator that listens with earphones to that conversation and then writes you notes as a primary in case you miss anything. Because remember, 4 sets of ears are better than 2. And then we have a tertiary negotiator that, for you instance, Dan, they would find out everything about you, whether you're married, military service, where you worked, all your social media. If you drink Coke over Pepsi, I want to know that as a negotiator. I want all the information, whether you like pets, things like that. It helps me negotiate with you, build rapport. So very effective. So there's a lot of moving parts in the background, but really that one-on-one with the primary negotiator and the suspect's the most important. But I've got to have the information that I need to enable to build trust and rapport with you.
I guess another one of the television and movie conventions you see about hostage negotiation has some basis in real life. I'm thinking about Waco specifically, when obviously that is a singular sort of negotiation, right? And what I'm thinking about is, right, you have the hostage negotiators trying to resolve the situation peacefully, and then you have the door kickers and the SWAT team wanting to take a more aggressive stance. Is that a tension that commonly plays out?
Yeah, it's constant. So if you'll see that in movies sometimes, that's the part of the movie that's 100% real. So as a team leader on a negotiation, I'm the liaison with our command staff, the SWAT team, lieutenants, captains that want to go and kick the door and arrest this suspect immediately. They think you're 30 minutes in, that's enough time. You literally need hours upon hours of negotiations, especially on these serious crimes where there's life is in danger. So it's kind of that telling your command staff, give us time. We're making progress. We're building rapport. This is how things work. We also invite our command staff SWAT team to our trainings so they understand how negotiators train through. We make them train as well. They actually get on the box and they talk to people so they know how difficult it is and how much time it takes to build that rapport. That seems to work very well. So back in the old days, they didn't co-train a lot, but nowadays your SWAT team and your negotiator teams, they're all considered the same part of the team. So negotiators are part of the SWAT team, just the talkers, but it works very well and it keeps people safe and it's a much better way to train.
And do you have the captain, hostage team is saying, give us 10 more minutes, and the SWAT team saying, and there's one guy at the top who always has to sort of be King Solomon here, right? and make the decision?
There is. We negotiators usually get our way because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my negotiation skills on that captain, and then he's going to give us more time. So that's never failed. Anchorage is really good. So they give us the proper amount of time. Now, when sometimes things turn bad, right? You have somebody started to shoot, things like that's when your SWAT team must go in. I understand that. But until that point, we want the opportune time to be able to talk that suspect out and de-escalate the situation.
Yeah. I mean, that's just fascinating stuff. I could spend hours talking to you about hostage stuff, but I also want to turn to the other major part of your career. And that's sort of the focus of your book. It's your time working sex crimes. How did that start? Like, how'd you move into that zone of things?
Well, I took a couple specialty classes on sexual deviancy and crimes. Really, as a cop, you should keep training yourself on all aspects, whether it's crime scene, homicide, negotiations, sexual deviancy. Alaska's, it's the largest state in the union, about 700,000 people. But we have a ton of crime. You have 8-month-long winters, extremely cold, dark. So oddly enough, we have a lot of sexual deviants, whether it's environmentally induced, whether they come to Alaska because there's not a large population. I don't really have an answer for that, but we just have a ton. So even working patrol, you're going to run across these cases.
Doug, I live in Florida. I think it's the same exact deal. Just flip the equation of temperature-wise.
Florida, the same thing. But it always fascinated me on why these deviants would engage in such weird fetishes, paraphilias, things like that on, innocent people, victims, friends, family, all that. It just fascinated me on the dynamic on how deviant society can be. And we all know it. We watch true crime. We read true crime books. But I think this book is different in that I focus on that deviancy, which there's no other true crime book like it. Now, it's a savage read. It's raw and it's intense. It's from the cop's view. I don't cut anything out of it. So it's the full story from start to finish. So I think it's unique, but that's kind of, it fascinated me, those type of crimes. I wanted to know why these individuals committed it. And I think after a long career, I realized it had nothing to do with the sex. It was about power. So really, they're using their power over these individuals. And that's what really excited them. It took me a long time to learn that. But once I did, each case is unique, but most of them were a power issue on the suspect's part.
Yeah, when I think about sexual deviancy and sexual offenses, my mind, what I do for a living, jumps to serial killers and like the biggest, brightest names in this realm. And when you really think about it, sexual deviancy, sexual offenses, I think it's fair to say probably operates more on like a scale, right? It's not all serial sexual offenders. It's not all the people who are serial rapists or serial killers or serial sexual assaulters, right? What's your experience with sort of like the range of these crimes?
Yeah, I talk about it in my book, is that once you read my book, you're never going to look at your best friend the same. You're not going to work at your boss, your coworkers, or your neighbor. You'll never look at them the same because these are everyday people in society that commit maybe not the serial killer crimes and the necrophilia or anything that's extreme, but they have some really odd fetishes throughout my career that I investigated. They may have been found out because of that crime or some other crime, but it's not unique to any individual. You don't know what your neighbors do. You're never going to. But it's fascinating to me on how much that occurs in everyday society. We had businessmen, religious people in our community, top of the line individuals that were found in some of these scandals and these sexual deviant crimes. And they had family, they had kids. On appearance, they were perfectly normal, but their sex life was quite different.
I have a theory about this. You've been in law enforcement a long time. I've been in journalism a very long time. We've both seen lots of stuff. And I think we're all deviant in a way, right? Like we're all different people in different ways, but there is one person that only belongs to us, right? And that's the part of us that we're afraid to share with other people. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's nefarious. It doesn't necessarily mean it's evil, but I think people would be surprised, like what we consider deviant about ourselves, probably a lot of other people share.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I talk about this. What it is, we all have fetish. Everybody's got a fetish. I don't know what yours is. You don't know what mine is. Most fetishes don't cross the line. They're perfectly acceptable if you're okay with them. They don't harm anybody else. They don't harm yourself. Paraphilias, that's when you kind of cross the line. You're getting more extreme, where you cause injury to yourself or others.
Now, let's define that just for people who aren't aware.
Yeah, so a paraphilia might be something like BDSM, where you engage in rough play with your partner, where you're actually injuring them. That's going to go into paraphilia. If you're just spanking with a feather, like on 50 Shades of Grey or something, that's not going to. That's perfectly normal. But paraphilia crosses the line where somebody else is harmed. That's where it gets dangerous. Fetishes, everybody has them. They're unique to the individual. I say in my book, if you think that downloading porn or doggy style is extreme, you probably don't want to read this book. It's not even on the map of extreme once you get into real deviancy.
Yeah, interesting. So what do you think makes people cross the line from fantasy into reality? What's the trigger?
You know, it goes back to just criminal behavior too. You might shoplift before you do a burglary. You might do a burglary before you do a robbery, onto sexual assault and then homicide. Not all criminals go that way, but I think that sexual deviancy is the same way. You kind of wade in the water a little bit, trying something that's not too deviant. But if you have that criminal element, that mind, you keep pushing it, and eventually you step over. 99% of humanity are never going to cross that line. They're just in their own lane with a little deviancy or sexual fetish that they have, but they're not going to cross over to injuring somebody else. Again, that's a criminality part of it. And so that, whether that's inherent, whether it's learned, I'm not positive. If I was, I would have solved every crime known to man. I wish I did know, but I think that's part of it, is they build, similar to regular crimes, they build up slowly but surely and then start committing these crimes.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Israel Keys, and people who've watched and listened to this show know that we did a big exploration of Israel Keys, including one of your colleagues, Jeff Bell. And he talks about how the only reason he got caught is because he had to keep upping the ante, right? And I don't know if you're involved with the search for Samantha Koenig at all, but that was one of his last killings. And he said that he totally broke his MO just because he needed the thrill. He talks about how after he kidnapped her, he was holding her, bound in his truck, and a APD car pulled up next to him, and like his heart's beating. And so I think for a lot of folks, for criminality, it's just chasing the next high until the next high is not enough. Keys obviously is an extreme example of that, but is escalatory behavior sort of the thing that you come across in criminality?
I think it is. Serial killers are quite unique. Just for your information, Alaska has the most serial killers per capita. Again, we have a small population, but we've got a ton of serial killers. Very familiar with Israel Keys. The entire department was searching for Samantha Koenig during that time frame. It was a weird case. He's a serial killer that would leave Alaska, for your listeners, commit homicides, then come back home. In his interviews, he said his brain overtook him. He couldn't resist. He knew not to kill in Alaska because law enforcement might grab him. So he fought that as much as he could, but eventually it took over. The brain disease took over, and he committed the homicide. Luckily for us, we were able to catch him. He's probably good for 11 or 12 more. He committed suicide in jail, so we'll never know the full extent. But I would have loved for Israel to give all his homicides so we could have closure for the families. That's kind of what you wish as a cop. Once you're over that hump of arresting the serial killer, you want to solve the rest of them for families. We're never going to get there with them. There's multiple others. I've dealt with a number of serial killers.
Yeah, tell us about some of them.
Joshua Wade's another famous serial killer from Alaska. He's probably good for 10 to 15-ish. He's convicted of 5. We had a massive manhunt for him. I was a negotiator that came out. He broke into an apartment when he was on the run, took 2 hostages. So that's where I came in to kind of negotiate him out. Obviously, we want to keep the hostages safe. He's already committed multiple murders. It's not far pressed for him to commit more. So that takes a long time. And eventually he was able to come out, and I think he got a 135-year sentence.
Did you know he was a serial by the time when he...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We had a jury that acquitted him on an initial homicide that he was certainly good for. Again, you never know what a jury's going to do. So they acquitted him of this homicide. He later admitted to it. There was no doubt in every department member's mind that he would kill again. And then about 5 years later, he probably had additional killings in between there, but we were able to grab him for another murder 5 years later and finally put him away.
How do you approach a negotiation like that? Going back to Israel Keys, I know when he was being interrogated at APD, you had the FBI involved, you had the FBI's BAU in the other room sending text messages and that sort of thing. Like, were you going commando on that, or did you have guidance on how to deal with a serial killer when you're negotiating with one?
Yeah, we train all the time. So we'll train any scenario, whether it's a serial killer, somebody very religious, whether we train everything. So that way, when you're in the situation, I think what I found with serial killers in negotiating with them or interrogating them is that you play upon their ego. They have massive egos. They're sociopaths. So they like to be talked about. They like to talk about their murders. They want to be their own serial killer. I found that always fascinating. When we would compare him to Ted Bundy or somebody else, they'd be like, no, I'm my own guy. I research my own thing. I have read Bundy, but I do my own thing. They really want to be acknowledged for how great of a killer they are. So as odd as it seems, I'm going to play upon that and tell them what a great killer I think they were, how planned and professional they were, how smart they sound on the phone, and just play on that ego, and they start talking. Yep. Inevitably, it works. They can't help it. They tell you their story. Now, it's a painful hour to listen to a serial killer tell you how great they are, how smart they are, how they killed these people with no emotion, but it's necessary to get to the end. So that's what I play on ego a lot. Typically works with somebody, especially a serial killer.
Yeah. Those are tough to hear. Like, I've heard the Koenig confession. I've heard the Bill and Lorraine Currier confessions, and, people who listen to the show have heard that as well. And you can almost hear the reliving going on as they're recounting those things to you. I know in Key's case, he was getting physically excited, but yeah, going back to serial sexual crimes, most serial killers are serial sexual offenders. How do you stop folks like that, right? How do you stop sexual criminals? It doesn't have to be serial killers or a serial sexual assaulter, right? It can be a victim of sexual assault in different ways. Like, how do people protect themselves against that sort of stuff?
How do you stop them? I think the easy short answer, and I'll explain why, is to arrest them. I think out of all the crimes for rehabilitation, sexual deviancy is the one that works the least in prison, and because they reoffend an enormous amount. Meaning in my career, when we have a serial sexual predator, I've never seen them come out of prison on their first crime and not reoffend again, ever. When you have burglars, robbers, things like that, they get rehabilitated, they go on to live a normal life. Sexual deviance is a whole different animal. The brain's hardwired differently. I interviewed one suspect, he was a pedophile, and I asked him, how could you do this, right? And I didn't fully understand, but he told me, do you like women? You're married? I was like, yeah, I am. He's like, well, I'm going to tell you you're going to like some other sex tomorrow. Could you do it? Obviously I couldn't, right? I'm hardwired to like women. He said, I'm hardwired to like kids. You're never going to change it. And it kind of blew my mind a little bit as an investigator. I was like, wow, that's pretty good intel there, right? So I think sexual deviance is almost impossible to cure. I know a lot of people want to rehabilitate everybody. And if it could happen, I tell you, I wish it could. I think that's one category that you got to lock them up. I think how people protect themselves is follow your gut. Most of the victims I've ever talked with knew something was wrong, knew they shouldn't be in a private place. They shouldn't go to a hotel room, an apartment, a house. They felt something was odd, but they thought that's not going to happen to me. And then they were victimized. So follow your gut. If it feels unsafe, stay away, go somewhere public, call somebody, keep yourself out of those situations. Police are great, but we can't be there 24/7. So ultimately, everybody's got to protect themselves first. Certainly, if you're in danger, call the department 911 for help, but you got to protect yourself first, and that is following your gut.
What about the everyday stuff? And by that, I mean the potential everyday stuff, like a sexual criminal moves into your neighborhood, they're registered, you know that they're there. What's the best way to stay? I guess this is a tricky question because not all sexual registered offenders are created equal. Is that a fair statement?
True, very true. Lots of different crimes, yep.
Yeah. And I think people will be surprised as to how many registered sexual offenders may be near you. I was researching another crime for another story, and, I was looking to see, how many people are on the registry near this particular address. It was a lot in just the middle of nowhere, right?
Yep.
So when you find out someone has moved to your neighborhood and is a registered offender, what's the best way to responsibly sort of manage that knowledge?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for your listeners, anybody can Google their neighborhood on their state registry. You're probably going to have a sex offender living near you. That could be with mom and dad, grandparents, something. They may not own the property, but they're living there. One, it's good they're registered so you can see it. We have a lot of times where they don't register. They're hard to find because they're committing these acts. Second is typically on your registry, it's going to tell you what the deviant crime is. If it's against kids and you have kids, well, that should answer for yourself that your kids are kept very close and you got to watchful eye. They're not playing in the neighborhood near that home. I mean, as bad as it sounds, that's what you have to do. If the suspect hasn't committed anything in 20, 30 years, that's probably another sign that perhaps they may not. You always have to keep your guard up. But I would research the case individually. You can read about it. You can go down to your local courthouse, pull documents, case reports. It's all public information. So again, it's on yourself to research that, protect yourself. But again, the ones with kids that predators against children, I think those are the worst. You have to be very careful, especially if you have a family and kids around. So protect them, keep them away, and probably have a talk with them as well and let them know that this house, this area, you got to stay away from. It's
great advice. So when you wrote your book, you consolidated all the knowledge that you gained from your very long police career and dealing with all these cases. And I imagine when you're compiling all this stuff, you're reminded of things. You think back on your career and you take the biggest lessons that you've learned and share them with us. So as you were going with that process, what are some of the things that really made you say, that's a really important thing to know, or this is something that I want people to take away from this?
We touched about it earlier. It's the power aspect.
Yeah.
Where the sexual deviance, these predators or suspects that prey upon innocent members of our society, victims, it's really about the power, even though it's a sexual act. They get the high, the euphoria that you talked about earlier, doing the act on an individual that obviously doesn't want the act perpetrated on them. So as sick as that seems for normal people to think about, that's what they get off of. The sex is second. The biological is second to them. The power's first. That's really in the research and all the cases I've worked as an investigator really rings true to me each and every time is that power thing. They really get off on that. They'll admit to it in interviews. They don't hide from it. Yeah. They get extreme power. Our serial killers that have sex with the bodies post-mortem after they're dead, purely power. They're re-victimizing that victim that they've already killed. As extreme as that is, they want to harm them even more. So they have sex post-mortem with these victims, which is very fascinating, but it's purely power.
Yeah, again, Israel Keys.
Yep.
I don't know how to make this pivot, so I'll just make this pivot
Sure.
from this. But your book also talks a lot about just sex itself, right? What are your biggest learnings about sex that people could take away? It's not all nefarious, it's not all devious, but we're all sexual creatures, and you have a lot to say about that.
Well, I'm going to tell you your sex life is perfectly normal. If you don't think it is because you've got a little fetish or something, read the book and you're going to realize it's normal. I have a lot of fans and people that will email me on the my website, but I have neighbors, Rob and Nancy. And what's interesting there is Rob, the guy, will ask about bank robberies, serial killers. Do you ever get in these shootouts, things like that, which are all cool cop things to talk about. The wife, Nancy, will dig into the most sexual, deviant questions ever imaginable and keep asking more and more, where I thought it might be the opposite, where the guy digs in a little bit more and not the woman. But by far, my sweet spot in sales are probably women aged 30 to 60. And then the emails that I get on my website asking really intricate, specific questions on the deviancy fascinates me. Because the guys are one thing, they like cops and guns and shootouts, but the women really focus on these questions, which I don't really have an answer as to why that is, but they're the ones that dig deep and want to know more about. Even on serial killers, necrophilia, bestiality, they ask very specific questions. I've always been fascinated on that. It is, I know, they absolutely love it. And I'm happy they're reading my book. But again, your sex life is perfectly normal.
Yeah.
Once you read this, you'll realize that. There is a chapter at the end. It's called Teachable Tidbits, because the book is pretty powerful and extreme. So at the end, I do a fun chapter. These are little sexual fetishes that I learned in my career on calls that you might incorporate into your own sex life that aren't criminal, that don't harm anybody, that might be fun. Now, that goes from cough drops to other things, but that's up to the reader to read through these stories. They're still real cases, but they're not criminal in nature on using these items or whatever it is for sex. So it's kind of a fun chapter because after the first part of it, it's pretty savage and tough. So kind of let you off with a little bit of fun at the end.
You did the reverse of what we did in this interview. You started off fun.
True, very true.
But like, that goes under the category of we're all deviant in our own way, or at least we think we are. There are things we view about ourselves that we view as deviant, but it's just normal human behavior, and as long as it stays harmless, right?
Exactly. And thinking about something and doing it are two different things. I talk about necrophilia, which is a tough subject. Mm-hmm. That's, having sex with people that are dead.
Yeah.
There's fantasy necrophilia, and I work this a lot, especially with working girls or prostitutes in Anchorage, is there was a John that would hire her only to play out his fantasy necrophilia. He would pay her to have sex with her, make her lay perfectly still, like she was dead, and have sex. I find that very weird. To my knowledge, that John never elevated into actual necrophilia or homicidal necrophilia. He just fantasized about it and paid prostitutes. Again, he was a business guy in our community. When I talked to him later about this, his wife didn't like his fetish of doing that. She wouldn't do it. She actually called him sick. So in his mind, going out and engaging with prostitutes was perfectly okay because his wife wouldn't do it. But that was his little fantasy. As extreme as it might be, I don't think he would naturally act upon it, like actually kill somebody to have sex with them. But he really enjoyed that fantasy necrophilia, which is something that most of us aren't ever going to do.
I like to end all interviews by asking, what did I not ask you that I should have?
Yeah, I think what's one thing that I always like to talk about, and I know I'm biased, is our law enforcement, the men and women out there in our country every day that serve and protect us. I did the job for a little over 25 years. I loved every minute of it. And I know that on the media, things like that, and you can get some bad publicity for cops. But I remind all listeners that police departments are no different than hospitals, Microsoft, whatever office you may work in. You have bad employees sometimes. But again, it's very small. So I really have a huge shout out to the men and women in law enforcement because I know what they do each day, long hours. They're there to protect you. And again, 99% of them do their job perfectly. It's that 1% in all professions that kind of throw a loop in everything. But again, your police are there in your communities to protect you. Please reach out, thank them for their service, do community ride-alongs. If they have citizens academies for you, attend those, learn more about your department. We work much better as officers when our community is involved. We get all the information, we solve more crimes, and we make everything safer. So I always like to give a shout out to those that I used to work with that continue this job each and every day because it's really important. They're kind of our frontline defense in the U.S. And I'm glad your listeners haven't seen evil. I've seen true evil in my life. It's horrible. So we need those law enforcement officers to help protect us and to put those bad guys in jail. It's really important.
Where can people find the Doug Fifer Experience, your book, more about you, everything that you're doing?
Yep. The book, 50 Shades of True Crime, you can go to dougfifer.com. That's just DOUGFIFER.com. You can watch a book trailer to see if you're interested in the book. It's kind of a sexy Anchorage, Alaska book trailer. So check it out. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, audio, Kindle, really wherever you buy books, you can find the book. Read it again. It's going to be true crime focused on that sexual deviancy, fetishes, paraphilias, things like that. But it's unlike anything you've ever read before. These are all 100% true cases. You're going to see booking photos, crime scene photos. You're going to get the 101 of the cop world from me, from my eyes. So a pretty different read than you're used to.
And you can find the link to that in the description below or in the description of this show. Doug Fifer, thank you so much for your time. Fascinating conversation. I love talking to you.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.